the Soviet Union had a very definite position on the question of war. And I'd like very briefly to summarize, I won't give you the details. The Soviet Union's position was very, very clear. Firstly, it was the endeavor of the Soviet Union not to embroil herself in any war with imperialism. Second, since it wasn't up to the Soviet Union to avoid war, it required two. It meant that imperialism didn't want to fight against the Soviet Union either as well. So, the Soviet attempt was that it should never find itself in a position where it was having to fight alone against any imperialist power or having to fight alone against the combined imperialist powers. Third, the Soviet Union was fully aware of the fact that there were real differences of material interest between the so-called democratic imperialist states and the fascist states. The fascist states had come late on the scene. Because of the operation of the law of uneven development of capitalism, certain states had their tempo of economic development had increased enormously, and they were leaving behind the old established imperialist powers. But the division between the old and new imperialist powers was based upon a time when the old imperialist powers were economically all too powerful. So the economic basis of that division had changed and it had to be rechanged. Now, when the whole world has been divided up, and after the occupation of Africa, after what's called the scramble for Africa, and after China's various ports had been occupied by the various imperialist powers, there wasn't much empty territory to satisfy the newcomers. Now, if you come to this hall, and there's a banquet going on, and there are 100 seats around the table, and they're all taken, and 6 people come, and they need to be seated as well. Of course, we are comrades, and we'd say, comrades, okay, it doesn't matter, you're late. 6 of our comrades will get up and you sit down. But that's not the way how imperialists decide. The latecomers are told, no, you can't come, it's our table, we're having a banquet, can you leave us alone, undisturbed? But the new ones are also very sure of their strength. They want their fair share. The slaveholders want their fair share of the slaves. They want to have their share of the loot. And such matters in the world of capital is not decided by amicable argument or by a debate. They're decided by fisticuffs in the end. And so the new ones actually wanted to wage war to get at the colonies of the old imperialist powers. Germany, Italy, and Japan wanted to actually get hold of the colonies that hitherto belonged in quotation marks to France, Britain, and everybody else. So there were material differences between the two powers, and the Soviet Union felt it could use those in order to actually conclude an alliance with the democratic states in order to face the fascist states. That was the Soviet policy. Fourth, to that effect, to that purpose, the Soviet Union devoted itself to conclude a collective security pact with the democratic imperialist states. Fifth, when the democratic imperialist states, overcome by their hatred of communism, refused to conclude a collective security pact with the USSR and continue their policy of appeasement of the fascist states, in particular that of Germany, in an effort to direct her aggression in an eastwardly direction against the Soviet Union was forced to try some other method of protecting her interests, protecting the interests of the socialist motherland and the international proletariat. And seeing what the Western countries were doing, Stalin had the occasion to speak on this subject at the 18th Party Congress in March 1939. That is, just after the Munich Agreement. And he said the policy of non-intervention reveals an eagerness, a desire not to hinder Germany, say, from embroiling herself in a war with the Soviet Union, to allow all the belligerents to sink deeply in the mire of war, to encourage them surreptitiously in this, and to allow them to weaken and exhaust one another. And then, when they have become weak enough to appear on the scene with fresh strength, to appear, of course, in the interest of peace, and to dictate conditions to the enfeebled belligerents. And he then went on to say, one might think that the districts of Czechoslovakia were yielded to Germany as the price of an undertaking to launch the war against the Soviet Union. He said these people are accustomed to having other people pull chestnuts out of fire for them. let them remember, those who refuse to cooperate with the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union is not in the business of pulling chestnuts out of fire for them. This speech was read all over the world, and it was read by Nazi Germany's leaders as well. They realized that to serve their ambitions, they had to come to terms, albeit temporarily, with the Soviet Union. So they conducted negotiations through their ambassador, and they wanted to conclude a non-aggression pact. And the Soviet Union concluded a non-aggression pact with the Germans. And by doing so, turned the tables on the Western powers. And by turning the tables on the Western powers, what happened? Once the non-aggression pact had been signed, the game of appeasement was up. Germany had signed a non-aggression pact. She was not in the business immediately of attacking the Soviet Union. But at the same time, Hitler felt he could now invade Poland. So on the 1st of September 1939, German armies marched into Poland. And as they marched into Poland, Britain and France either had to accept the fact that Germans had a right to go into Poland, just as they had accepted the fact that Germany could march into Czechoslovakia, could march into Austria and do all those things. But they realized the game was up. In order to defend their imperialist interests, they had to threaten Germany. So the ultimatum was given to Germany to withdraw within 48 hours, failing which France and Britain will go to war against her. Of course, the Germans paid not the blindest bit of notice to the ultimatum, and they carried on. France and Britain went to declare war on Hitler, on Hitlerite Germany. Now, much is made of the fact that as Hitler forces moved eastwards, the Soviet forces moved westward and took certain parts of Poland, so that there was a collusion between Hitler's Germany and the Soviet Union of Stalin. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Soviet Union waited a whole 17 days to see how the Polish army would be able to defend itself. Soviet Union could not defend Poland because before the Second World War, the Soviet Union had tried her very best to offer protection to Poland. But the Polish government was so reactionary, it was a semi-fascistic government. It hated the Soviet Union. It had actually concluded an alliance with Hitler, and as a result of it, it had actually occupied certain portions of Czechoslovakia as well. This is not very well known, but this is true. But the Poles wanted the Soviets to give a guarantee against Germany, but didn't want the Soviet Red Army any right to enter Polish territory. Now, how do you defend a country which says you cannot enter our territory? The Soviet Union could do nothing. After 17 days, the Polish state simply collapsed. It was at that time that the Red Army moved in order precisely to occupy the areas which were part of the Soviet Union, which in 1918-19, the Polish landlord government had forcibly taking advantage of the weakness of the Soviet Union.
They were part of the Western Ukraine and Belarus.
Absolutely, absolutely. They were taken. And the Soviet Union, the Treaty of Riga was forced to accept that. But that was in violation of the international borders of the Soviet Union as set out by no less an imperialist statesman than Lord Curzon. This is known as the Curzon line. And so the Soviet Union, by moving her troops there, saved these people, at least for 2 years, from the onslaught of Nazi Germany. They saved not only Ukrainians, they also saved a lot of Jews who lived in that area. Would people want us that this area was rather occupied by Germany, so Germany could kill the Jews and the Ukrainians and everybody else in those areas? I think these people are speaking too soon and revealing their colors by doing so. Once the Soviet Union was attacked, everybody, from the bourgeois generals to bourgeois statesmen to Trotsky, believed that the Soviet Union would collapse within 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 6 months. And 6 months in the end got to be nearly 4 years. And during those 4 years, the Soviet people put up tremendous fights. They defeated the Nazis in Moscow. They defeated the Nazis in Stalingrad. They defeated the Nazis in Kursk. And they defeated the Nazis in Berlin. That sight at the end of April 1945, 30th of April 1945, with Soviet soldiers climbing up the Reichstag and implanting the red flag with its hammer and sickle on the same day as the Führer committed suicide is a memorable event